as we are learning more about this crash, has your response changed in any way?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're going to see market reaction. This is definitely bad for Russia. It's bad for Europe. The fact is there's going to be a lot more pressure now on the United States and the Europeans to provide military support for the Ukrainians to help roust these separatists from East Ukraine. There are reasons why both don't want to take that step. They don't want to get involved. But you got a lot of Europeans that are on this plane that are now sitting dead on the ground in the southeast. There's absolutely going to be an outcry in some European circles telling these folks we have to do more than we have. We can't just sit on the sidelines. American Congress is going to make calls saying that American sanctions have been ineffectual. You've seen that in the course of the last week. All the while Putin is saying, wasn't me, wasn't us, and we absolutely will defend the right of Russians on the ground who've already had referenda for autonomy and independence in this territory that Putin himself has said he respected. So the likelihood of military escalation as a consequence of this tragedy, almost surely a mistake, is actually very high.
Ian, there's no question accusations will be traded on both sides. The Ukrainians are accusing the insurgents. The insurgents, no doubt, will accuse the Ukrainians. How possible is it to establish with certainty who shot the missile and what part of the country it came from?
In the near term, it'll be almost impossible to establish that, short of the local separatists, deciding that they want to actually say that they take responsibility for it, which is almost inconceivable. So clearly, in the same way we've had enormous accusations traded from the Russians and the Ukrainians straight through this crisis over the last 3 months, the stakes have gotten higher. There's no reason to believe that that's going to change. And the actual crash site will probably be, quote-unquote, corrupted by forces on the ground almost immediately. It's hard to imagine that we're going to get something that looks like certainty while all of the forces have to decide what to do. There can be calls for cooler heads and patience, but the fact is that this is already an escalatory environment. The military casualties on the ground have been increasing in the last few weeks. Sanctions had expanded just yesterday. The Russians have said that the response was going to be serious. This was the absolute worst time for something like this to occur. The markets are taking their time because they don't necessarily know how to respond to geopolitical events. They're not good at it. But believe me, there are impacts that will affect those that are investing in this region.
Ian, is there a possibility that the Ukrainian government is responsible for this tragedy? Again, just to reiterate, the Interior Ministry says that the insurgents, the pro-Russian insurgents in eastern Ukraine, shot this plane down. Is it possible, though, that somebody, that some incompetent or inexperienced member of the Ukrainian military actually pressed the button?
Anything is possible. The Ukrainians do have the military capacity to shoot down a plane, and this is the highest flying plane that the Russian separatists would have shot down if they got it. Having said that, the separatists are not flying any planes in this region, and the separatists themselves have already shot down a number of planes. So, a preponderance of evidence, and if you ask me reasonable doubt at this point, it's clearly everything is pointing towards the Russian separatists, but you are not going to get conclusive proof here, certainly not in the near term when all of the sides are going to be on razor's edge as to demands and escalation.
Ian, when you talk about we are seeing reports on Twitter and elsewhere on news wires from Interfax that the rebels have reached the site where the plane appears to have crashed. I mean, at this point, it's almost beyond a doubt that the plane did crash. The question is whether it was shot down. When you talk about that site being corrupted, what exactly do you mean? Are we not going to get the black box, for example?
Yeah, for example, there's a decent chance you're not going to get the black box. There's a decent chance that the crash site, when any international observers might get to it, is not going to be in the same condition as it is presently. And as a consequence, it's going to be more difficult to piece together, and I use that term advisedly, what the hell happened here. I think it's going to be very hard to make definitive proof that this actually was shot down by a Russian separatist. The evidence is is very significant, but the evidence is circumstantial, and that, of course, makes it much harder. Also, keep in mind that Putin himself has been at no point taking any responsibility for the military acts that occurred in southeast Ukraine. Clearly, there are Russian citizens that are involved, volunteering, if you will, in the military activities that are there, but there are also a lot of Ukrainian citizens that are involved in this fighting, and that makes this much more complicated as well. This is not a war, a clean war between the Russians and the Ukrainians. This is a shadow war which is occurring, very much a gray zone between a lot of local Ukrainians on the ground that are very opposed to Mr. Poroshenko, the Ukrainian president in Kiev, supported, funded, and clearly having gotten some direct arms from the Russian government as well, very little of which is actually provable.
Ian, I just do want to add that Interfax is reporting that Ukrainian rebel forces, these are the pro-Russian insurgents in eastern Ukraine, have reached the site of the crash and say that they're going to turn over the black box. Obviously, we have yet to see whether that happens, but for the moment, that is what they say, according to reports from Interfax.